Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Hitting the High Note, a Four Horsemen novel, Book 3 by C.A. King, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Dante poured himself a double shot of whiskey. It slid down his throat, burning a trail from mouth to stomach. He shuddered at the taste, glancing at the label on the bottle. It wasn't the spirit's fault, although it lacked the depth of character he preferred. The company he was in was to blame. That was what made such a drink a pleasurable experience. A bit early for alcohol, isn't it? Creta squawked. That's a matter of opinion, Dante replied, pouring another, even if the taste was as bitter as the sight of his third wife. Keeping his back facing her didn't stop memories of her thick, stone-gray skin etched with wrinkles and scars. My opinion says it is, Creta blurted out. His wooden desk begged for mercy beneath the pressure of a single fingernail. The scraping noise was simply more torture to add to a long list he kept tally of deep within his mind. Must you do that? Dante complained. You know I'm at a disadvantage since my wings were clipped by that horseman and his flower girl. Besides, if you paid proper attention to your wives, I wouldn't have to, Creta argued. This is why we can't have nice things, Dante scoffed, turning around. He pointed to the gouges in the wood. You can buy whatever you want, Creta hissed. This piece of junk can be replaced 1,000 times over. It's an antique, Dante replied. I don't expect you to understand the value of such things, but surely you can grasp the concept of it being aged and irreplaceable. You bore me with your relics, Creta scoffed. They are nothing more than souvenirs of a world long lost. Those days are gone for a reason. Maybe it would be better if they still existed, Dante argued. Things were built better back then. There was quality behind the work rather than a mass production of items meant to appease the out-of-control population. He leaned back in his chair, polished black shoes hitting the desktop. Don't judge me. He shook his head. You've already ruined it. My feet can't make things any worse. You haven't said a thing about my appearance, Creta complained. I thought you might like a change. What do you think? Does this form appeal to you? She spun around in a circle. There's another 5 years before you are fertile again, Dante replied. The glass pressed to his lips, stopping further words from escaping. I was hoping we could play, Creta cooed, rounding his desk and chair. Her hands reached over his shoulders, playing with the buttons on his shirt. Don't you fancy a little pain and a lot of pleasure? I can offer you both. Not really, Dante said, pulling away from her grasp. I never enjoyed women who spent a few too many hours in the plastic surgeon's office. Creta cupped her breasts. Too big? Much, Dante replied, rolling his eyes. Tell me what you want then, Creta begged. I can be anything you desire. A redhead with large hips, perhaps? I can be exactly what you want. I doubt that, Dante mumbled under his breath. The sound of rapping on the door hid his response. Come in. Any visitor was a welcome distraction. Sir, a man said, standing at attention before them. I received a message that you wanted to see me. Have you located the artifact yet? Dante questioned, eyeing the man up and down. Or a line on our third key? No, sir, the man answered. His hands remained folded behind his back. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, proof of his guilt. Wandering eyes kept Creta's ample bosom in view. He reeled in his drool before attempting to speak again. We believe the item is being stored in a place that protects it from being traced. The moment it is in the open, we will know. Dante leaned back, twiddling his thumbs. It's Carl, isn't it? Tell me, Carl, do you like my wife? Sir? Carl stuttered. Do you enjoy the way my wife looks? Dante questioned. Do you find her attractive? He stood, rounding the desk. They aren't difficult questions to answer. Take a good look. Creta's new form posed seductively. The man's gaze alternated between the two. She's a very attractive woman, sir, he answered. You are a lucky man. Excellent, Dante exclaimed, clasping his hands together. Since you failed to fulfill your current duties, I am reassigning you. Reassigning, sir? Carl echoed. I'm not sure I follow. Creta circled the man, glancing over every inch. One hand grazed over his shoulders. What a wonderful idea, she cackled. Very good, Dante said. You have your new play toy. Take him away and do what you must. Send in a replacement for him on your way out. Oh, and Carl? I wouldn't look directly into her eyes. Those black pits of ooze can affect a man's sanity. A coy smile formed in the corners of his lips. Trust me, I'd know. He tossed back the remainder of his drink. The man's eyes widened, curious as to what had happened. He stumbled, Creta's grip on one arm tugging him along behind her. Another man appeared in the doorway a moment later. Ah, good, Dante said. I need you to take over for Carl. He won't be in any condition to, he shrugged his shoulders, do much of anything for a long time. What's your name? Dean, sir. How can I serve? Find a way to bring the artifact and the third key into the open, Dante ordered. We need to locate them before anyone else does. Understood? Yes, sir, Dean answered. Well, Dante said, what are you waiting for? Go. How exactly did you want me to do that? Dean questioned, his brows forming peaks before crashing down into a frown. I don't know, Dante bellowed. Take out an ad in a paper for all I care. Just get me results or you could end up one of Creta's play toys too. Trust me, you won't like that. You have 48 hours to show me progress. Understood, sir. The man scurried out the door. Dante tapped his fingers on his desk. The new damage meant renovations were in order. Perhaps it was time for a new look, one that would suit the room after his plans were completed. Things were progressing as he anticipated after all, and ahead of schedule. It wouldn't be long now. The top drawer squeaked open. A picture stared back at him. He ran his fingers over each person's image, saying their names out loud. Michael, Gabrielle, Uriel, and Raphael, he sighed, slamming the drawer shut. You'll soon understand. Chapter 2. A string of robberies left Becca no choice. She wasn't the only thing in the music supply store that was fourth generation. The alarm was too. It had to be updated. The worker installing it glanced over his shoulder, unnerved by the hole her glares were burning in the back of his uniform. She had no intention of blinking either. This system cost more than she could afford and did considerably less than was needed. State-of-the-art anything wasn't made for family businesses, especially when the family consisted of one person. Becca had been brought up in that very store, providing her with a strong appreciation of music. A future without the shop didn't seem possible, even if her dream was to one day play in an orchestra. Of course, there wasn't much chance of that happening. Practice might have made perfect, but it didn't matter if nobody ever heard that perfection. All done, the installer said, brushing his palms against each other. You press your code, and then have 30 seconds to leave the premises. When you open, unlock the door, and you have 30 seconds to input your code. 30 seconds? Becca exclaimed, counting on her fingers how long it took to get the keys out of the door and the coffee cup rim from beneath her teeth. That's not a lot of time. She scurried after him. It's pretty standard, the man said, trying to make his escape. It might seem a bit daunting if this is your first security system, but you'll get used to it. He shoved a piece of paper in her face. If you mess up, that's where you call. Give them your codes, and they will call off the cavalry. A bell rang to indicate he was leaving. Wait, she called out. The man stopped in the doorway, turning to face her. His expression held his questions without the need for words. You are sure it is all working? She asked, chomping on her bottom lip afterwards. It isn't going to fizzle out the first time I try to use it, right? Yeah, he said. I tested it. That's my job. It's what I get paid to do. I have a lot of other calls to make today. Have a good one. Thanks, Becca called out to her closing door. The numbers on the paper were cringeworthy. Anything outside of her normal routine was. Creatures of habit weren't good with change. She'd been opening and closing the store since she was a young girl in exactly the same way. Adding something new to the mix was as frightening as playing her music with someone listening. It simply didn't happen. The palm of her hand hit her forehead. This wasn't a choice she could afford to make. The Velvet Violin was a robbery away from bankruptcy, the same as any other business on the block. She rounded the cash counter to twiddle her thumbs until the schools let out. The fact of the matter was, she didn't need to be there in the morning. No one came in until late afternoon. Ever. That left plenty of time to worry about her first time closing up and opening again using the alarm. If she did it wrong, she'd have no one to blame but herself for ruining everything. She buried her face in her hands, letting out the breath of air she'd held a little too long. A cup of tea, Becca declared, perking up. That was exactly what she needed to calm overactive nerves. At least that was what her mother always told her. There was no point to argue with the dead woman over tradition. She headed to the back to put on the kettle. Becca glanced around the room, patiently waiting for the water to boil. It was a no-win situation. The longer she waited, the longer it took. If she left, however, the kettle would blow its whistle the moment her back was turned. Her foot tapped on the ground, a hollow noise echoing back. She glanced down at the rug loosely covering the family treasure. As far back as she remembered, it was always called the vault, although it had no locks to speak of. Built by her grandfather, it was merely a hiding place that had remained a trusted family secret to that day. Inside was the one thing she couldn't allow to be stolen. According to a notebook of her ancestors, it was a lost relic of the music world, a violin dating back before the name Stradivarius was even thought of. Only a handful were made, and even less surfaced. It was her pride and joy. One day she'd find the nerve to play it. For now, it remained safely stashed away and only brought out for cleaning and maintenance. Steam poured out of the kettle spout, its whistling noise making her jump back a step. One hand covered her chest as she caught her breath. Hot water covered a ball-shaped silver holder, waiting patiently inside a white mug. There was nothing fresher than mixing one's own blend of tea leaves. Becca blew on the liquid, hoping to cool it down enough for a sip. It was silly, really. It would be a few minutes before she could taste the brew. Any sooner and there'd be a burnt tongue to deal with. If that happened, it wouldn't only be the tea that had no flavor. Her taste buds would revolt for the rest of the day, making everything bland. Even worse were the tiny blisters that would form. The bubbles would drive her crazy for days, tongue rubbing against the back of her teeth, trying to scratch them away. The mug sat on the counter, the handle still steadfast in her grip. Becca glanced to each side before pulling out a paper from under the counter with her free hand. A mischievous smile crossed her lips. The tabloids were her guilty pleasure. It didn't matter if anything printed in them was real. If she wanted the truth, she could turn on the television and watch the news. Fantasy was what she craved as long as it was served with a side order of danger. Her knight, however, didn't have the shiniest of armor. In fact, it was more than a little tarnished. Still, he needed to ride in on a stallion and save the day. The from whom and why were technicalities that mattered very little. Heroes always wanted to save everyone and everything. That wasn't the plan in her dreams. When she closed her eyes and let her mind drift, she was the only one being saved. In the background, any number of classical pieces would be playing. There were a few that would set the atmosphere perfectly. It wasn't as if her imagination was abnormal other than the musical aspect. There were a lot of middle-aged women who toted around romance novels to whittle away at the doldrums of reality. In their minds, they played the leading lady swept off her feet by the muscular and super sexy hero. He would be able to save the day and offer a dozen orgasms without lifting more than a finger. Becca's choice for reading was no different, although probably a bit less erotic and a wee touch darker. She preferred a dash of action with an alien or demon or two thrown in for good measure in lieu of extra muscles, a motorcycle, and some tattoos. If she was going to fantasize, it was going to be a doozy. Go big or go home. There was nothing to lose. It wasn't like any of it was ever going to come true. Her free hand turned the pages, stopping at an unusual advertisement. Demons and followers seeking the key to the gates of hell and unusual artifacts. New cult members welcome. Apply at... Her mouth dropped open. The address was less than 2 blocks from her shop, and the meeting was on the one day of the week she took off. It was a sign. It had to be. A chuckle escaped her lips. She never did anything outrageous in real life, but this was too good to be true. If it was only to take a quick peek. It couldn't hurt. Besides, she didn't have anything they were looking for. She didn't even have to go inside all the way. Showing up to a building was a whole lot easier than trying out for the symphony. Hopefully, it would be just as satisfying.